Have you heard about the cemetery that's buried beneath the park? Let's talk about it. In Denver, Colorado is a beautiful park called Cheesman Park, where strange things occur. Underneath the Cheesman Memorial, shrubs and greenery are thousands of bodies that were left behind due to one man's negligence. But before we get into the creepy tale, stab the subscribe and like buttons and torture the bell to stay up to date with everything horror here at Tunnel of Darkness. You may just hear an urban legend near you. Now, let's learn the history of Cheesman Park. Cheesman Park was once known as Mount Prospect Cemetery in the 1800s. General William Larimer had set aside over 300 acres of his land to create the cemetery, but in 1863, the cemetery was in serious shambles. Cattle was allowed to roam freely in the cemetery, and no one made an effort to maintain the graves. The land was eventually sold to the city, but only if the city would keep it as a cemetery. A few years later, Denver residents began calling the cemetery the Old Boneyard, Boot Hill, or Jack O'Neilla's Ranch, who was said to be a very popular man that was gunned down in a saloon on March 30th, 1860. Residents debated where to bury Jack, so Mount Prospect Cemetery was chosen. This left the residents not wanting to be buried with quote-unquote riffraff, leaving the cemetery to be the resting place for criminals and the poor. In 1890, Congress had agreed to allow the cemetery to be converted into a park. The mayor of Denver allowed families to remove their loved ones, but after a year, he realized that there were still thousands of bodies still buried in Mount Prospect. So a local undertaker named E.P. McGovern was hired and paid $1.90, which is about $53 today, for each casket he removed and reburied in Riverside Cemetery. But E.P. didn't do that. Instead, he filled child-sized caskets with random body parts and wood. He will also leave the graves he dug up open, which caused an uproar in the community. He was quickly fired and faced a range of charges, but no one was hired to replace him. The city knew there were thousands of graves that were still untouched, but by 1804, the ground was leveled and grass was planted over the land. In 1907, the wife of a wealthy businessman named Walter Cheesman donated a pavilion to the park to be renamed after her husband. People have experienced unexplainable things at Cheesman Park. Visitors have said that they will suddenly feel overwhelmed with sadness and dread. Locals that live by the park reported experiencing ghostly activity in their homes and have seen unhappy spirits wandering around the park at night, but then vanish into thin air. A ghost of a woman will be seen singing in the park. Residents and visitors say that the woman will be singing alone and wearing outdated clothing, but she will disappear as quickly as she appears. The strangest thing about Cheesman Park is that patches of discolored grass are allegedly throughout the park. Many believe that the patches are indicators of a body buried underneath. What do you think? Are the souls of the forgotten bodies wandering the land that was once considered their final resting place? Or could the mistreatment of the deceased open the door for creepy tales to be told through generations? Let me know in the comments.